Well, another quarter has passed, and that means that we have a brand new batch of 13F filings. These filings allow us to see what some of our favorite super investors have been buying and selling in the last quarter, and it's a really interesting way to not only track what some of our favorite investors like Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, Spier, Mohnish, Pabrai, and so on are doing in their portfolios, but it can also be a nice way to source potential investment ideas that might warrant further digging for our own portfolios. So in this video, I want to go through some of the latest updates out of this fresh batch of 13F filings, which will give us information for these investors' portfolios at the end of March 2023. We'll go through some of the usual culprits like Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and Mohnish Pabrai. And like I usually try to do, I'll also add in a new investor towards the end that I don't cover every single quarter, but is in my sort of broader range of 13F filings that I keep an eye on every single quarter as this new data comes out. So if you enjoyed the video and haven't subscribed to the Investing with Tom channel already, please be sure to do so. But without further ado, let's get straight into these latest 13F updates. Now, as always, a few things to keep in mind right across the board with all the investors I will cover in this video is that our 13F filings give us a lot of information about the portfolios of the investors I'll talk about in this video, but they're definitely not a complete picture. The 13F just specifically shows US domiciled companies, US listed companies. They're not going to show us any international stocks that some of these super investors might own, and they also don't necessarily give us the broader context of the investor's portfolio. It doesn't tell us, for example, how much an investor might have in cash. It doesn't tell us about any private investments that might make up some of their portfolio. It's literally just the US listed stocks that the investor owns. In certain situations, we do get a view into some of the international holdings that some of these investors own. Again, it's not a complete picture, but for example, Warren Buffett has recently been buying up several of these Japanese trading companies. Now, the local rules in Japan are basically whenever you exceed 5% ownership in a Japanese company, you are required to file a Japanese regulatory filing. And there are some other websites, I'm going to use TIKR in this video, that collate those international regulatory filings. So I'll also try and cover those in this video where it's relevant as well. But with that preamble out of the way, let's get straight to the big dog himself, of course, Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway. Now, a few things to keep in mind again with Berkshire is that they do run a very top-heavy portfolio, and they also have a couple of other money managers, Todd Combs and Ted Weschler, who manage a smaller portion of the portfolio. I believe it's roughly $30 billion out of Berkshire's broader $300 billion portfolio. So we can be pretty confident that anything in probably the top 10 or so positions is almost certainly a Warren Buffett holding. Ted and Todd just don't have enough capital to, have a position that would land itself in the top 10 for Berkshire. But some of the smaller positions may well be Ted or Todd, or they might be Warren Buffett. We just don't quite know when it gets down the smaller end of the portfolio. But even within the top 10 this quarter, the position's very likely to be Warren Buffett himself at Berkshire. We did see quite a few kind of smaller adjustments around the edges. So starting from the top, we had Apple, which was added to 2%, and now makes up 46% of the US portfolio. That's followed by Bank of America, that was added to 2%, now makes up 9% of the portfolio. No change in American Express or Coca-Cola. A couple of adjustments to some of the big oil companies that Berkshire have recently been buying into. So Chevron was trimmed 18% and Occidental Petroleum was added to 8%. So an interesting little reallocation kind of between the oil companies there for Buffett. Continuing through the top 10, no change in Kraft Heinz or Moody's. A trim of 6% of the shares in Activision Blizzard. This is one that Buffett was questioned on. In the recent Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting, he didn't really give away too much around whether he might have sold completely out of Activision maybe in the second quarter of 2023. Now that the Activision Microsoft buyout looks potentially a little less likely to go ahead. So that'll be an interesting one just to keep an eye on for the next round of 13Fs. But at least at the end of March, he'd only trimmed it about 6%. And rounding out the top 10 for Berkshire, we have HPQ, which was added to 15%. Now, there are 52 stocks listed in the 13F data this quarter for Berkshire Hathaway, but now that we're only up to position number 11, we're already down to like 0.9% of the portfolio at the largest. So I'll quickly run through some of the other changes that we see here, but just keep in mind that once we're outside of the top 10 or even the top 5, really, they are very much small parts of Berkshire's portfolio. It is very, very top heavy, with Apple making up almost half of the pie at this point. So we had very small adds to 2 stocks, that being Citigroup and Paramount Global, less than 1% additions to both of those companies. General Motors, which has been a pretty long time holding for Berkshire at this point, was trimmed 20%. Aon PLC trimmed 1%. Amazon trimmed 1%. We know for sure that is either a Ted or Todd position. We don't know whether it's Ted or Todd, but we definitely know it's not Warren Buffett. He did say that in an interview a couple of years ago. We have a 9% reduction in Celanese Corp and a brand new position in Capital One Financial. Continuing down the list, Berkshire trimmed McKesson Corp 19%. They sold down Ally Financial 2%. They added to Markel in a very small way, less than a 1% addition to Markel. They filed a brand new position in Diageo PLC. I have no idea what that company does, so if someone can let me know down in the comments, that would be great. We have a 4% reduction in Jefferies Financial Group, a brand new stock, which is Vitesse Energy. And finally, we have 4 stocks that were completely sold out of by Berkshire. Firstly, we have US Bancorp, which was previously 0.1% of the portfolio. Next up, continuing on the banking theme here, Bank of New York Mellon, completely sold out. That was previously 0.38% of the portfolio. Next up, Taiwan Semiconductor, that was previously 0.21% of the portfolio. A lot of these are largely expected sales out of Berkshire. We saw big reductions in them last quarter, and Buffett has said in recent interviews that he's changed his mind on Taiwan Semiconductor as well as a lot of the bank stocks. So not surprising to see those leave the portfolio. And finally, we see RH, or Restoration Hardware, previously 0.21% of the portfolio as well, sold out of completely. Now jumping across to TIKR and looking at some of the international holdings, there's not a whole lot to report here, at least directly with Berkshire Hathaway Inc. Kind of itself. I'll expand on that a little bit shortly. But the only international stock we actually see here is IAG, and we don't have an update on that position since sort of mid-2022. It's a relatively small position, only 0.1% of Berkshire's portfolio. But if we dig a little deeper, we actually do see a few other international stocks. Now we know, for example, that Warren Buffett has been buying these Japanese trading companies. They actually don't show up directly under Berkshire Hathaway Investments on TIKR, but they do show up under National Indemnity. National Indemnity is a large insurance business that is owned by Berkshire Hathaway. So occasionally, some of these stocks will be in sort of Berkshire's main account, but occasionally they'll be within some of its subsidiaries as well. So if we look up National Indemnity, we do see all 5 of those Japanese trading companies. Latest data I've got here is about 6% or so of the entire company across all 5 that Berkshire owns. So within National Indemnity, we do see those 5 Japanese trading companies show up in the portfolio. And along similar lines, Berkshire Hathaway also does have an investment in the Chinese electric vehicle business BYD. Again, that is not in Berkshire's sort of main account. It's in one of their subsidiaries. This time it's in Berkshire Hathaway Energy. So if we go to Berkshire Hathaway Energy on TIKR, we see one single holding, which is BYD. And we saw that they have continued to trim this position. They've been steadily selling it down, probably over the last year at this point. And they reduced their shareholding a little under 10% as recently as the start of May 2023. So really not many massive purchases or sales for Berkshire Hathaway in the first quarter of 2023, but we saw quite a bit of activity around the edges, and even in those larger stocks in the portfolio, small adds, small sales, and a fair bit of shuffling around from Warren Buffett. Okay, moving on now to Warren Buffett's right-hand man, Charlie Munger. This is going to be a pretty quick update because in classic Charlie Munger style, there was zero activity in the quarter. And to be specific, we're not actually looking at Charlie Munger's personal portfolio or anything here. Rather, we're looking at the Daily Journal Corporation's portfolio, where Charlie Munger for a long time was the chairman of the business, and still today he manages the investments for the Daily Journal Corporation, which make up a pretty significant chunk of DJCo's overall business. So in the 13F, we see 4 stocks. These are the exact same 4 stocks that we saw last quarter for Munger and the Daily Journal Corporation. Those are Bank of America, about 41% of the portfolio, Wells Fargo, about 37%, Alibaba about 19%, and US Bank Corp about 3%, and no change to any of those positions, no purchases or sales or anything like that. Now, looking internationally, we don't see any additional filings for the Daily Journal Corporation and Charlie Munger. We do know that he for a long time owned BYD. He may even still own some BYD through the Daily Journal Corporation, but the holding's not large enough to warrant any sort of Chinese regulatory filing. So we don't have too much of a view into exactly what Munger is doing there. Along similar lines, there's been a lot of speculation that Munger also may have a Tencent position. Again, we just don't have any filings that would kind of confirm or deny that. So just the 13F data this time around for Charlie Munger. Moving along now to Mohnish Pabrai. Now, Mohnish Pabrai has a few US positions that we'll go through in a sec in his 13F, but he does also have a number of international holdings as well. And we do see some of those over on TIKR with some international regulatory filings that Pabrai has triggered, but I highly doubt that it's the entire portfolio. So just keep that in mind when we're looking through some of the positions here. But a fair bit of activity just in the US portion of the portfolio. So the largest US position was Micron. It was previously 77% of the US portfolio. He's trimmed that down about 14% in terms of the number of shares that he owns. So quite a big change there to be cutting Micron. It's a position that's been in the portfolio since the fourth quarter of 2018, and he's pretty steadily added to it over the years as well. Some pretty interesting moves here around Brookfield Corporation and Brookfield Asset Management. Now we see an 8% addition to Brookfield Corporation, and we see a 100% sale of Brookfield Asset Management. Now, Mohnish Pabrai only bought into the Brookfield companies pretty recently, the third quarter of 2022, according to his 13F data, and Brookfield recently went through quite a major spin-off. So that's how Pabrai kind of ended up with these 2 different Brookfield companies in the portfolio, Brookfield Corporation and Brookfield Asset Management. So quite interesting to see that since the spin-off, he seems to be leaning more towards Brookfield Corporation rather than Brookfield Asset Management. He's added to Brookfield Corporation, sold completely out of Brookfield Asset Management. And for whatever reason, Mohnish does continue to have a very, very small slither of the portfolio on Seritage Growth Properties. Mohnish manages several $100 million in terms of its portfolio at this point. He has $26,000 of Seritage in the portfolio, so not too sure what he's up to there, but no change in that very, very small SRG position. Looking internationally, we do see a few holdings show up for Mohnish, namely Nice Holdings Corp, Racist Logistics, which is a Turkish business, Edelweiss Financial out of India, Sunteck Realty out of India, and Rain Industries, also an Indian business. A couple of these have recent updates. So Racist Logistics, at the 1st of May, he owned almost 30% of that business, so no change in his shareholding there. But some of those other positions, Sunteck Realty, Rain Industries, Nice Holdings, for example, at the end of March, he added very modestly to Edelweiss, about 3%, had no change in Sunteck, and also no change in Rain Industries. The only one that we don't have a recent update for is Nice Holdings Corp. Our latest update there is from mid-2022. And at that time, Mohnish sold down about 28% of his position. Moving now to a very good friend of Mohnish Pabrai's, and that is, of course, Guy Spier of Aquamarine Capital. Guy is starting to definitely build this reputation as a Munger-style portfolio activity sort of person, where there's really not a lot of buying and selling. There's a lot of just sitting back and letting the businesses compound. And that theme continued with a kind of perfect score this quarter. So absolutely no US portfolio activity for Guy Spier this quarter. Largest positions remain Berkshire Hathaway, American Express, MasterCard, Bank of America, and Ferrari. And rounding out the portfolio, we have Micron, Moody's, Alibaba, Sierra Digital Growth Properties, Daily Journal Corporation, and Alphabet. Looking internationally for Guy Spier, we have two additional stocks that show up. One of them is Indian Energy Exchange, which we have seen no activity in terms of buys and sells for that business. And the last one is TIKR AB, which we actually do see a little bit of activity here for Guy Spier. So on the 3rd of May 2023, a filing came out that Guy had reduced his holding in that business by about 0.5%. And that's a pretty small position anyhow. It's only about 1.4% of Guy Spier's total assets under management. So very, very minor bit of activity this quarter for Guy Spier. Okay, next up, let's talk about Li Lu at Himalaya Capital Management. Now, for anyone who's unfamiliar with Li Lu, I highly recommend going and checking out some of the talks he's given over the years. I really enjoy his one that he gave at Columbia for Bruce Greenwald's class. Great kind of value investing talk if you're interested. I've watched it multiple times. And Li Lu kind of rose to fame not only through his phenomenal returns, but also through the fact that for a long time he was the only investment manager to manage money for Charlie Munger. Munger has most of his net worth in a very small handful of investments, most notably Berkshire Hathaway and Costco, and also some real estate, some apartment buildings in California, I believe. But he also has a big chunk of Li Lu's fund, Himalaya Capital. Now, I've also got to keep in mind here that Li Lu invests a lot internationally, most notably in China. According to some SEC filings, he has about $14 billion in assets under management in his fund, yet the 13F filing only represents about $2 billion out of that $14 billion. So the portfolio we're seeing in the US here is really quite a small chunk of Li Lu's overall investments in his fund. But nonetheless, some pretty interesting activity this quarter. So we saw a 23% addition to Bank of America, which is now a quarter of the US portfolio for Li Lu. We saw him cut his Micron position almost in half. It was down 40%, now about 20% of the portfolio. We've got two classes there of Google stock. So we've got GOOG and GOOGL. If we combine those positions together, that's about 28% or so of the US portfolio. Berkshire Hathaway B shares, no change there, and no change on Google, I should say, as well. A brand new position in East West Bancorp, which is not a business I'm too familiar with, but clearly amidst the banking crisis, he liked the price at which he could buy shares in that business. And no change in the smallest position, which remains Apple. Looking internationally now for Li Lu, I still don't think we have the full picture here, but we do have one additional stock that shows up. That is Postal Savings Bank of China. Again, the regulatory filing here is pretty old, so that is from the end of December 2021. So presumably no changes to that position since then, but I do know that there are positions that Li Lu has in China that are not showing up here. The most notable one is BYD. I've done a video on the channel here going through, Li Lu's very successful investment in BYD. As far as I can gather from going through the regulatory filings myself, I can't see that he has bought or sold BYD very recently at all. I think it's just been so long since there's been an update to that holding from Li Lu that it seems to have dropped off some of these sites like TIKR. So all we're seeing for now, kind of officially, I guess, is Postal Savings Bank of China, but I'm fairly sure there's a big BYD position in there as well, amongst probably others that are too small to warrant regulatory filings at all that we're just not going to see anywhere. So that kind of covers all of the usual culprits and the super investors and 13Fs that I like to cover on the channel here every single quarter. But before we wrap the video up, I want to cover one additional 13F that jumped out to me with some of the changes they've made in the first 3 months of 2023, and that is none other than Bill Ackman of Pershing Square. Now, Bill Ackman, like a lot of the investors that I've covered in this video, runs a pretty concentrated portfolio portfolio, taking large bets on individual companies that he tends to hold for a very long time, all going well. Occasionally we'll see him buy into a company and reverse the decision pretty quickly because he thinks he's made a mistake. Netflix being a fairly recent example of that for Bill Ackman, but generally speaking, he buys into a company in pretty significant size relative to his overall portfolio, and he tends to hold it for a long time. And in this quarter, we saw a brand new one of those big bets from Bill Ackman. So if we go through some of his holdings, we saw some reductions, some smallish reductions in a few of the stocks for Bill Ackman, but the largest position remains Lowe's. That was reduced about 3%. Followed by Chipotle Mexican Grill, reduced not quite 7%. We then have Restaurant Brands, no change there. Hilton Worldwide Holdings reduced 7.3%. Howard Hughes added to about 0.5%. Canadian Pacific added to basically not at all, added to 0.01%. And most notably, we have two different share classes of one brand new stock, which is Google or Alphabet. We have about 8.2% of the portfolio coming from the Class C Alphabet shares, GOOG, and another 2.2% coming from GOOGL. So if you sort of add those two positions together, it's pretty similar in size to the Canadian Pacific position, very roughly about 10% of the US portfolio. So a pretty major and interesting move there from Bill Ackman. I don't believe he's ever had a significant investment in Google. I don't think he's ever had any investment in Google for that matter. Someone can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong on that, but I'm fairly confident Bill Ackman has never owned Google. So very, very interesting to see him add that one to the portfolio this quarter. And looking over on TIKR for any international holdings, we do see one additional position for Bill Ackman, which is actually his largest holding, and that is Universal Music Group. It's about 33% of the pie for Bill Ackman, about a $4.3 billion position, or more than double Lowe's, which is the largest holding that we saw in Bill Ackman's 13F, and no recent changes in shareholding with that Universal Music position. So there you have it. Those are some of the latest updates from some of my favorite super investors for the first quarter of 2023. Let me know what you think of some of those portfolio changes that were made down in the comment section below. And if you enjoy these types of videos, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But that's it from me for this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.